Anybody recognize this? If not, that's okay. This particular text adventure game I just got into myself the other day. Now, you're probably wondering how I got into text adventure games, considering that a lot of people these days that are my age or younger probably haven't heard of them. You know, they were around in the 70s and early 80s. It was actually not through a computer terminal that I got my introduction to this. It was actually through this device, the Braille Note. This particular unit, the Braille Note M Power, which is no longer sold by Humanware, went to the manufacturer of the device. I remember a very interesting little story behind this. First of all, I was working on my undergraduate degree, and I was working at a middle school in my area, and I was working with a student. Well, their particular teacher of the blind came in and told me, or asked me, whether or not I knew this device, whether or not I knew the Braille Note. And I said that I knew some of it. I'd never actually worked with it in person, but she said that I was still a lot better than what she knew, and therefore was going to be teaching it to her. That really blew me aback. I had a lot of fun doing it. I set up the students' Braille Note. I set the clock for them. And I also went on to explore the applications. And, you know, I was going to focus primarily on productivity because obviously I was going to be teaching this to them during the school hours, and it's best they do, you know, stuff that would contribute to their classroom work. But at the same time, you cannot be all classwork, right? You need to be able to take a break. So from that to that end, I explored the games menu and actually got into the included text adventure game, also known as interactive fiction, that was available on the Braille Note. And I actually played the game for just a few minutes just to get the hang of it in case we ended up getting there. We didn't in the teaching, but I was thinking that if we did, you know, that I would just explain how it works. So I needed to get the hang of it myself. I love interactive fiction, text adventure games. Now, what's interesting again, I didn't get an introduction. I didn't get an introduction to this through a sighted computer terminal, but through a device meant for people like me who are blind or have low vision. And even after having played Zork in a completely text-based on screen, I have to say that I miss playing it on the Braille Note, and I would consider myself to be more at home playing it on the Braille Note. Another interesting introduction that I had was to the Pocket PC. For those of you who are not familiar with it, the Pocket PC was the predecessor to what we would see now with Windows Phone. The iPhone pretty much killed it off because when the iPhone was introduced, it completely turned everything upside down. Before the iPhone was introduced, people would use devices like this, and their cell phones would remain separate. And they used these primarily as productivity tools. Microsoft never intended the Pocket PC to really be used by the mainstream. In fact, Apple was the one that brought this kind of productivity and smartphone device. Now, obviously, this is not a smartphone because back then things were more separate than they are now. But Apple brought the sort of technology to the masses. But before then, this particular device was primarily.
It's 12:45.
Primarily used by the professional market, say somebody who had to keep track of a very busy schedule, like a teacher or a you know, a secretary or a business executive, that sort of person. But my introduction was not through this handheld device. It was actually through this. What you see before you is definitely a Windows-style keyboard. In fact, as I understand it, the manufacturer, Freedom Scientific, as you can see up here at the top, sourced this keyboard from Toshiba. But the device itself is the same as this handheld device right here. It is a Pocket PC, as you can see in the upper right corner. You can see the same insignia down here. It's kind of hard to see. I just happen to know where it is because I know the product like the back of my hand. But it's right here under the arrow keys, the words Pocket PC. And if you turn the product upside down, you would see Microsoft Windows powered. But as you can see, this PackMate QX400 running JAWS, the JAWS screen reader, was my first introduction to the Pocket PC environment. And to be honest, even after having used, I never got one of these myself, and I'm glad I didn't because they died off fast. But my personal introduction to this was through non-visual means, because this is a Pocket PC device. The only difference is that instead of a stylus and a screen, you would have keyboard and speech output. Otherwise, it's the exact same thing. You could go to it's got the same Internet Explorer, the same Word, the same Excel, the same stuff. In fact, it uses a lot of the same wording. So in order to tap here, for instance, you would press Enter on the keyboard. But otherwise, it's the same thing as what this handheld device is. And to be honest, I miss, even after having used the device in the store, I apologize for getting off track, but here's what I'm going to say. I prefer the audio interface. I miss the audio interface. I guess in a way, with the keyboard, it made Pocket PC feel more like a desktop environment. It felt very similar to desktop Windows in that respect. Had I been introduced to it in this sense, in the handheld sense, I probably would not have thought that. But because I was introduced to it using a screen reader I was familiar with, and am familiar with actually, which is JAWS, and a Windows keyboard, I felt much more at home on the PackMate than I did with any handheld device. Most recently, introduction to podcasts. I listen to Twit, I listen to CNN Radio News, I listen to Main Menu, which is a technology podcast for people who are blind, because it focuses primarily on blindness technology, things like screen readers, screen magnification, money identifiers, Braille displays, that sort of thing. But it wasn't through, I've had my iPhone for years and years, and before that I've had an iPod Touch, and I never really got into the whole podcast thing with the iPod. And this is, again, I actually got into it by non-visual means through this device, the Bookport Plus. Now, I had to load the podcast URL through a piece of software that comes with the unit, but being able to download your podcast and update the episode list through a screenless form. Now, I'm primarily a magnification user. That's why my arrow is going all over the place, because right now, while you guys see the entire device, for instance, in this photo, I see from here on down to about here. Okay? So if you followed my arrow, you can see that I have a much smaller field of view than you guys do. But even though I am partially sighted, I prefer the audio interface for some reason. I can't explain it. In fact, I've been using VoiceOver more often on my Mac, and I'm not using it now just because the screen recorder and the screen reader tend to draw a lot of power on the system, and the screen reader would have become really sluggish in its response. Plus, it doesn't seem to like Firefox very well for some odd reason. I mean, it'll navigate Firefox all right, but it comes up with Firefox Busy, which you can think of like an Audible Beach Ball on the Macintosh or an Audible Sand Timer on Windows. and it just kept saying busy, which drove me nuts. But no, interesting introductions, aren't they? To this day, with a text adventure game, I have to say that I would feel much better playing it on the Braille note than I would on an actual computer. And I, I guess part of it is because that my vision it flexes, but it's stable in a sense that there's no drastic changes. Um, but at the same time, moving around like this all day with the magnifier, for instance, right now, I'll give you another example. Right now, I can see, if I can try to keep things still here, I can see this up to about here. We go down, stop, around. That's my field of view. So it's very small, much smaller than what you would expect um, for a fully sighted person. And moving around like this all day can cause strain on my eyes. And just to be able to relieve that at the end of the day with an audiobook from my book port, it's just I don't know. Again, I've even gotten to using iChat more with voiceover than I did than I do with using sighted means. Now I alternate between them, but as of late I've been using voiceover more and more to give myself a rest. And I guess again I prefer the audio interface. I guess because I've gotten the introduction to things like text adventure games, Pocket PC, podcasts through an audio environment. Um, but how many of you out there have had an introduction where you've been brought into something one way, and then you try it the other way and realize that the first way is something that you definitely prefer, even though the other way is more common? For instance, let's go back to the example of the Pocket PC. Nobody would use this device. Nobody who's fully sighted anyway. Compared to people who are blind, I mean, there are millions of us, but at the same time, it's a small population. Um, but nobody who's fully sighted would use a device like this. They would use a more mainstream device like this. And even when I could see, I had to get close to see the screen because it was so small, particularly for the print. And even with the magnifier, they didn't give me that didn't give me system-wide enhancement like I would need. Um, but after having experienced it on this device, most people wouldn't think of using this device. They'd think of using the handheld device again. And the introduction to audio, to the Pocket PC environment in audio, has left me, I would see this and my logic would be turned upside down. Because traditionally the Start menu is on the bottom of the screen on a standard Windows desktop, right? Well, because I was using this as a standard Windows desktop in a way, as far as getting myself orientated to it, that's what I did. I actually pressed the Windows key to activate the Start menu, and instead of going down, I went up. So I thought the first item was Help, not the Today item. But it's really interesting how when you see something one way and all of a sudden you see it another way, you know what I mean? I mean, what do you guys think? But interesting introductions, aren't they? Thank you for watching. Comments are welcome, and have a nice day.